In 1935, Gertrude Stein, in her lectures on America, wrote the oft-quoted and still resonant line, "I write for myself and strangers." Hello, and welcome to the No Hair, All Heart podcast. I'm your No Hair host, Mookie Spitz. And the affair of the heart that I'd like to talk about today is that of being a writer and the writer's relationship to themselves, friends and family, and strangers. We are creatures who need social reinforcement. We are programmed instinctively to react to others and adjust our behavior based on their approval or disapproval. We can go into the deep social Darwinian roots of this, but suffice to say that if roaming tribes of proto-humans wouldn't have had this need ostensibly programmed into us as pure instinct, then tribal cohesion, learning, all of this would have been interrupted, our survival threatened, and there's absolutely no way that I would be sitting here podcasting in our year 2025 unless we all felt this way. I mean, if we really think about it, how much of our lives is designed to placate others and gain their approval? Our jobs, our families, our very sense of identity is based on this mirror reflection. And the relationship is complex. We map the world internally, regardless of your Myers-Briggs Jungian coordinate system, introverted or extroverted, thinking or feeling, intuiting or sensing. We map the world inside our heads and hearts, and based on that emergent relationship between our brains, in a sense, creating the world around us, and the world around us stimulating our brains to create it, out pops our sense of self and the world. This reciprocal relationship is continuous, and central to it is this input of feeling and energy from other people. Now, as a writer, this is acute. Writing is so intensive. It's difficult. It takes a lot of energy to manipulate the symbols on the page, on the screen. There's a host of mapping that takes place. Learning and relearning and sharing and communicating. If we trace the origin of writing all the way back to the cave paintings in southern France, to the hieroglyphs of the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians, the cuneiform writing, the evolution of language, the Phoenicians, into the Gutenberg printing press, making it disseminated, making learning a public and common experience, all the way into our digital world, where we check our phones hundreds of times per day. Writing is central to civilization. But of all the things that we do to communicate with each other, writing remains, arguably and interestingly enough, the most complex. And it's reflected in the engagement metrics that we're able to analyze on our digital devices. As a marketer and an advertisement guy, PR person and communications expert, I've seen a lot of these numbers. They're the basis of campaigns that I've personally helped put together for brands. And as part of the reports that come out of the analytics, alphanumeric text writing skews exponentially lower in the form of engagement, audience engagement, than any other modality. And this is inclusive of images, still images, video, even audio. Look at the explosion in podcasts that's happened just over the last decade or so. The pandemic, making us all homebodies, accelerated these trends, but they were evident years before. And writing and reading skews at the very bottom of how people prefer to consume information. And that has everything to do with the difficulty of writing and reading, symbol manipulation and processing. Very, very demanding and quite removed from how we naturally experience the world. We are visual creatures first and foremost, followed by our ears, auditory. Then I would put sensation, smelling, touch. And then beneath all that, the feeling, the emotion. Writing, symbols, processing? Nah. For all these very reasons, however, the art of writing, especially creative writing and literature, continues to hold a special place and always has been special, arguably for these very reasons. That very mapping and processing and the distance between the writer and the reader, it's that sense of anonymity and separation which infuriated Socrates, allegedly. Socrates hated writing and writers. He refused to write anything down. This might just have to do with him hating writing, maybe even reading. But his argument, at least as conveyed by Plato repeatedly throughout the plays and dialogues, throughout the elenchus, the Socratic elenchus of public, open, physical debate, was essentially this feeling of honesty and trust. Socrates apparently felt that if he couldn't see the person he was debating with, literally smell them, touch them, get the nonverbal cues that was inherent in communication, in debate, then that was inherently untrustworthy and incomplete. And in ways, he was right about all that. But with the advent of technology, as I've been describing, the dissemination of learning and education, we've obviously evolved that view. And clearly, Socrates survived through the ages because of his disciple Plato, who, not surprisingly, knew he had to write all this stuff down. Otherwise, how would we have cross-generational learning? If you didn't actually see Socrates debate someone in one of the forums of Athens, then he would be gone forever. So Plato captured Socrates for the ages. We're presumably thankful for that. But that sense of distrust, that sense of dishonesty, and the effort that goes into writing and reading remain true. Now again, writing, especially creative writing, actually takes advantage of this mystery, this separation, to make it even more powerful a communication medium. Much has been written and said about the power of not revealing, that what's hidden is more significant than what's revealed. And in writing, that's very much the case between writer and reader. You don't know exactly what's going on in that person's head and heart. And they're using this symbol manipulation and sharing to ostensibly communicate thoughts and most significantly for creative writing, feeling through this very clunky and complex form of coding. In this sense, writing is very similar to computer programming, where in computer programming, you literally have lines of code which command the machine to do things. Go to the next line, read the next line, move the cursor 3 pixels over and 2 pixels down, return to line 47. If then branching. Coding is commanding. You are putting together a continuous series of instructions. And in a sense, writing is very, very similar. You're describing settings, you're creating a world. If you're a good writer, then an emergent drama unfolds based on the needs of the protagonist, obstacles placed in front of them, and then the adventure of the hero's journey to realize their quest. But on a micro scale, almost a syntactic one, it's really a matter of coding from writer to reader a series of commands, if you will. Visualize in your mind this character. Then use your imagination and the mapping that I'm providing to create this world inside your head and follow along now. I'm telling you what the characters are doing and how they're feeling. And as an emergent layer, if you're paying attention, and we each have a decent command of the language and of writing itself, then you're able to reproduce the simulation of a fictional world in your head that's in my head. There's an awful lot going on in my head and in my heart. And you are now following my lead. I am the coder. I am the software programmer of your consciousness for the amount of time and effort that you put into decoding my code as a writer. And woohoo, let's go. Now, this is asking an awful lot of readers. You are asking the reader to put trust in you as a writer, that you've got that basic command of the language. You are asking the reader to spend the time and effort to decode this effort that you have put into this story. And there's the tacit assumption that you have the competence and the creativity to command attention in this very, very difficult and often arduous process. Now, before the age of digital, especially before the age of even broadcast content, television, we're looking at the 1940s, pretty much after World War II, right? Before then, there was radio. Families would sit around in front of the big radio in their living room, which goes back full circle to podcasts now, right? Isn't that kind of interesting? Anyway, and then before that, before Marconi sent a signal across the English Channel, it was all written, right? It was all text. We took for granted the idea that if you wanted to be updated about the news, that if you wanted any form of communication that was asynchronous, right? It wasn't in real time with people in the room with you. You had to write a letter. You had to write and read a newspaper article, a legal contract, a business deal, a book. Moby Dick. When Moby Dick was rediscovered, I believe it was in 1912 or something, Melville had died. Moby Dick pretty much bombed. It was this huge encyclopedic narrative, ostensibly about whaling, but it was revolutionary in this sense of using whaling as a paradigm for the world, and the world is a model back into whaling. And it was the culmination of this brilliant writer's career, and it was kind of a flop. It was, again, even too demanding of people at the time when reading and writing was really the primary form of communication. And Melville died. He had to work on the docks, apparently, until his death. And by any stretch, he was a sour, bitter old guy and forgotten. He wasn't the huge success that you assume he could or should have been, kind of a Van Gogh type in literature. And a university professor, I believe, discovered him a generation later. I think Melville died in the 1890s. And then 20 or so years later, wow, we're looking for the great American novel, and the great American novel was already written. It was Moby Dick. But I use this to illustrate that big books, demanding books, are tough. And it takes a while, even then, for society to adjust to it when reading and writing was it. And then, of course, you had James Joyce with Ulysses, a generation after that. We're moving into the 20s, then the 30s. The whole postmodern movement, and then the eruption of huge books. My personal American favorite, Thomas Pynchon, Gravity's Rainbow, Mason and Dixon. Wow. Big, big books. The writer working for years, creating elaborate, labyrinthine, complex books. So fast forward to our generation, 2025, and who's got the time for this shit? Who reads anymore aside from university professors? I mean, seriously. Sure, people like books. Don't get me wrong, there's a long tail for everything. People love Star Trek Lego. That's just the new line extension of the Lego franchise, and it's going to sell millions. So when you have a long tail, when you're able to micro-target segmented audiences and do it well, then sure. So, of course, people are still reading, and big books are still popular. I remember right at the cusp of the digital revolution, David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. That was a New York Times bestseller and a testament, in my opinion, to the power of Madison Avenue marketing, more so, no disrespect to David Foster, more about the PR and marketing in publishing at this cusp moment before the digital explosion than it necessarily said anything about the public consumptive viability of Infinite Jest, with paragraphs that went for 10 pages and something like 10,000 footnotes. It was deliberately post, unironic, modern. David Foster Wallace. A deliberative attempt to deconstruct and reconstruct writing in arguably the most self-indulgent and obsessive way possible. That national bestseller. That to me was the end. That was the coup de grace of the big book, Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I don't think anything since has compared to both the ginormous nature of that book, almost 1,000 pages. I don't know how many words, maybe 1.5 million words in that book. Gravity's Rainbow was chump change in comparison. And I could go on and on about the merits of Foster Wallace's writing, his whole approach. But the point I'm making is that that was the death knell of the big book, at least in terms of the bestseller. And it was fueled by hype, and I think it was almost a symbolic bye-bye to the encyclopedic novel. And again, this was pre-digital. It wasn't like you go out and buy the Kindle. You literally buy the 5-pound tome. So why do I bring all this up within the context of Gertrude Stein? Well, I just wrote a book. Not my first book, but the book that I always wanted to write. Since my early 20s, when I'm looking for purpose, I was all over the place. I was a physics major in college, and then I flipped to psychology because I felt that the human mind, in a sense, creates science. Not that there isn't an objective reality and that the scientific evidence-based method is flawed necessarily. But if you really want to get to the truth about the universe and our place in it, then science was limited. I also felt that I had a math ceiling, that I was good at mathematics, but I wasn't great. And I felt handicapped in physics classes. Like I knew what I was doing, but I was kind of in the middle. And my ego got in the way, but also my recognition that it would be an uphill battle for me to pursue the sciences. Even though I was fascinated by the sciences, I thought, wow, this is it. But I felt handicapped. And that really, really sent me into a tailspin. So a combination of being math ceilinged. And again, I wasn't math ceilinged as a freshman. And I really did well at calculus, and I loved abstract mathematics. But I looked around the room, and I just knew at least half the class was better at that than me. And that to me was a sign that I'd be screwed pursuing science, the hard sciences, strapped by being better than average, but still mediocre in comparison to my own classmates in science and mathematics. So I slumped into a bit of a depression, that early 20s kind of depression where you don't know quite what you want, and yet you want everything, and you change your mind every 5 minutes. So I flipped to psychology. For that reason, I was running away from my math ceiling, and I was running toward this idea after reading William James of this crossover boundary between science and psychology, between the world as an evidence-based objective reality and the subjective nature of human experience. And then the next flip came to philosophy, where the underpinning of psychology and even science seemed to be philosophical. And I was like, wow, I got it. This is it, man. This is it. And then I read like Karl Popper, even Feyerabend Against Method. And my brain was just exploding with this convergence of science, the hard sciences, psychology, and then philosophy, the philosophy of psychology, the philosophy of science, the philosophy of philosophy. Wow, this is the essence of reality here. But then it seemed to be spinning in its own BS. I felt like I was smelling my own farts in philosophy because it just seemed to break down into wordplay, going back to Socrates and Plato. Reading Socrates now, when for like 10 pages he goes round and round about whether beauty is beauty because the gods consider it beautiful or because beauty is beauty and the gods really think it's beautiful because it's beautiful. I mean, seriously, who gives a shit? So I got frustrated with philosophy. And then I had my next crisis in college. So the trajectory was physics, hard science. My head bumps into a math ceiling. I shift to psychology. I love that and realize that it has a philosophical underpinning that reverberates back into the sciences. And then I'm studying philosophy and I feel like I'm jerking myself off with these syllogisms. And I was over it. I took a class in logic and I was like, all right, so we're manipulating symbols and we're running proofs here on basic logic. But what the hell does this have to do with anything? And then I read Fyodor Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground and my head exploded. I was like, wow, this is it. Because what Dostoevsky did in that novella was not only crack the lid off what would become considered existentialism, pre-Sartre. You've got Camus' The Stranger embedded in there. But he used creative writing and literature as a vehicle to do all of the above. You had A, science, B, psychology, C, philosophy. And on the bubble test of what to do with my life, Dostoevsky demonstrated to me that it was D. It was all of the above. It literally blew my mind. I remember I'm about halfway through Notes from Underground and I couldn't believe it. It was literally breathtaking. This is it. I have found it. Literature is it. Creative writing. Why? Because you can cover off on all of these things. You're no longer bounded by a rigorous methodology where you spend 98% of the time building the house and 2% living within it. And maybe even a smaller percentage or anything that's left over, which is hardly anything or nothing, contemplating what it means to live in the house. It was an inversion of that. Creative writing allowed you to spend all of that time that you spent building through methodology and rigor into the raw lived experience and the sharing of all of these ideas and their relationship to each other. Wow. And then I entered the next crisis, which in retrospect lasted decades. And here's the problem that I had. And that was I didn't like my own voice. So I started feverishly writing. I copied Dostoevsky. And there's a piece on Medium where I wrote a little biographical piece where I emulated Notes from Underground. I think it's called The Confession. And I became Dostoevsky. And then I discovered Borges, Jorge Luis Borges. And that utterly blew my mind because it introduced fantastical extrapolations and interpolations of not only philosophy, but mathematics and the implications of the infinite. Wow. And then I started writing like Borges, and I hated it. I thought I was a tool. And I really, really lost respect for myself because instead of creating my own voice, I relied on the emulation of someone whom I admired and thought was great. In parallel, I committed similar sins with my music. I played a lot of guitar. And instead of writing a song that passionately expressed how I was feeling in the moment, I copied my guitar god idols, Eddie Van Halen, Yngwie Malmsteen. I have an active, arguably an overactive brain coupled with the physicality of fretboard gymnastics. My father was adept with his hands. He built furniture. He couldn't finish a sentence coherently, and he was either silent or screaming. That's the household I grew up in. But as a person, his talent was the physical. I think Jung would have categorized him as an introverted sensor, the most cryptic of the psychological types. And he would look at a slab of wood and see wood grain, the wood grain impression of like a face, a hand, and then he would stain the piece of wood to reveal the hidden pictograms in natural wood. And he would, emboss these and polish them and place them throughout the house as these weird epitaphs of his cryptic psychology. Deep shit, interesting. And he would build a bar. He would build tables. He had a factory in Caracas, Venezuela, all of his own making. He had a business partner who handled the sales, and he was in the shop designing furniture in the tubular style of the 50s. He had a factory down there in his early 30s. So my father was a builder, and I think I inherited some of the manual. I can't screw in a light bulb. I'm utterly incompetent with any kind of handyman stuff. But when it came to guitar playing, I had a natural predilection, pumped up with my natural dopamine-deprived brain. I became a guitar shredder. And I loved playing for hours and hours and hours. But I wasn't really playing music. I was using the guitar as a physicalistic expression of my energy and passion. And it became a challenge to become more dexterous mechanically. And I bring all this up because I took a similar approach to literature and writing. I became so obsessed with the syntax and an expansive vocabulary and all the ideas underpinning literature. And then when my brains exploded reading, especially the examples I cited, Pynchon's works, then I tried to become Thomas Pynchon. And this, in my retrospective analysis of my decades of being a struggling writer, was a combination of a lack of confidence on my part and also being overwhelmed with the art of creative writing itself. Sometimes you can be too smart, and I'm not saying it in a gloating way. I'm actually saying it in a self-deprecating way. You can just be too damn smart. You see too much. That idea that ignorance is bliss, well, it can be in the arts when instead of obsessing over what you don't know, you know a handful of things and then you just go for it. And again, in retrospect, I was the former. I knew so much and I read so much. I can't tell you how many countless hours I spent reading and reading. I inhaled books because I was seeking something. I was seeking the silver bullet, the golden key, the Willy Wonka golden ticket to literature. And if I read one more book and if I incorporated one more style, then the magic would happen. Just as I kept shredding and shredding and shredding on the guitar, and if I kept playing and playing and playing, this mythical super guitar style would pop out. I would be the new Eddie Van Halen, just as I would be the new James Joyce or Herman Melville or Thomas Pynchon if I kept reading and reading and reading and writing and writing and writing. And then it broke down to the point where I couldn't even, I was driving myself nuts structurally. I was asphyxiated looking at a page. So then I took the opposite tack. I started just writing spontaneously. And there was a period of at least a couple years where I had one of the early laptop computers, and I would go and just hang out in cafes in Chicago with my laptop and type like a madman. I'm sure people seeing me thought I was this spectrum disordered crazy person. And I would sit for hours and just type. And I saved a lot of this writing, and I ended up printing it out, carrying it with me from place to place. And I ended up scanning it when I moved from Brooklyn to the Lower East Side a few years ago. I've got it all on PDFs, and it has to amount to literally thousands and thousands of pages. It reminds me of the Seven movie with the serial killer when Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman find the guy's apartment, one of the best art direction setups of the crazy killer in film. And he's got endless journals in little squiggly writing, very precise, with no line breaks or indentations, going for thousands of pages with no dates, just barfing out his thoughts and feelings. I did that. Now, this is not a crazy person confession in a sociopathic way. This is a crazy person confession in terms of the effort that I went to try to break out of my impasse. I was stuck and stubborn because instead of writing about myself in an honest and transparent way and simplifying the complex and just creating a character and putting them in a situation, I had to be and do all these things to prove to myself that I was the thing that I was precluding myself from being because I was overdoing it, overthinking. And I've seen this pattern repeated in young people. I've seen it in a musician who is a brilliant guitar player and is actually a good writer. I heard a few songs that this person wrote and produced and were catchy, like radio material. And he pursued the path that I pursued. I see my young self in this young person, where instead of just writing songs, this guy has been cranking out air quote experimental music. That was me. That was I. And then in Chekhov's The Seagull, the young man who ends up committing suicide in the play, because you got to have a suicide in a Chekhov play or a murder. The gun has to be used. The crisis needs to reach its apex. This young playwright commits suicide, and this young playwright in The Seagull was me, was I. This is a common problem with young artists. You just can't stop. You won't stop. And you're doing it back asswards. Instead of going with what you know and transposing your everyday lived experience into the expression of your creativity, you try being everyone you're not. And in doing so, you're shielding yourself from the vulnerability of actually writing something meaningful that people might actually look at, because you're really just protecting yourself because you're scared. The bottom line here is fear. I am terrified of what people will actually think of me. So what I do is I create this elaborate creative construct where it becomes impossible for me to be read. Either I go on and on for 10,000 pages in a 6-point font with no line breaks, because no one will ever look at that, not even me. Just barf that out. Or write incorrigible copies of other artists and hide behind that. Now, in retrospect, this is self-evident, and I think I was going through exactly that because a lot of the rambling writing I wrote about was exactly what I'm saying right now. I was self-reflective enough to realize that my self-reflection was asphyxiating. What a nightmare. But this is a protracted adventure in this kind of dilemma. And it's a natural process. Now, I believe in this multiverse reality where everything possible plays itself out. And there are timelines, if this is true, where I figured this out much sooner than I actually did. Where instead of pretty much randomly knocking up this super cute young lady and finding myself 20 years into a family, that didn't happen. So who knows? Maybe I OD'd at age 40 rather than finding myself a father and breadwinner and corporate person. Maybe I'm dead in some of these universes. And maybe, just maybe, in others, I figured out what I figured out more recently a lot earlier than I did. But suffice to say that I can sit here after bloviating on for the last 20 minutes or so on how I fucked up as a writer. Not that any of this went to waste, because I learned. And out of those 10,000 pages, by the way, I've got whole novels that I could churn out now that I know what the fuck I'm doing. Anyway, that all said, now I can confidently say to you, whether you read my shit or not, that I have figured it out. My favorite scene in Breaking Bad with Bryan Cranston, the brilliant actor, as Heisenberg, the high school chemistry teacher who turns into not only a meth chemist, but a huge dealer and all the implications thereof. There's a moment in the series where he plans the mass murder of many of his enemies who are incarcerated in various penitentiaries. And he hires a bunch of thugs. And apparently they need to kill a bunch of people all within this narrow time frame, and it's logistically nearly impossible. And the other guy says to him in this meeting of the minds, the planning session, what you're asking for is just nuts. I don't think we can do it. And Cranston, aka Heisenberg, in my favorite line in the whole series, looks at them and goes, "Figure it out." And that was such a great line because he's the chemist, he's the genius, he's figured out how to elevate himself, if you could call it that, from an abused, neglected failure of a high school chemistry teacher who got cancer and is going to drop dead to this kingpin. He figured it out. And I think, honestly, I have figured it out. I figured it out. And I've ranted about this before too, but the biggest mistake I made in what I figured out is that it's all about the character. It's remedial shit. Go back to a shy list. It's not like me like figuring it out from scratch. It's just paying a little bit of attention and not having my own head up my own ass. It's like, wow, just, like Pynchon himself wrote, it's like we all just write about ourselves. So be honest. Number one, be honest with yourself and accept vulnerability. Instead of using your writing to camouflage your own bullshit and existential crises, use writing as a tool for what it's meant to be, especially creative writing, which is let it out. Number one, be honest and open. Number two, create a character who is an honest and open, albeit exaggerated or cynically extrapolated, paradoxical, ironic, funny version of yourself. Let it out. Don't hold back. Dial it up. All that shredding and riffing on the fretboards, all those millions of words that I have written that have got tucked away in binders, all that energy, all that practice, put it into dialing up aspects of your own flawed personality. Let it out. That's the start. Instead of doing the opposite, which is hiding behind a bunch of erudition and bullshit. And then, number two, Put that character into a scenario where there's a clearly defined issue. There is an exciting opportunity, and then there's a series of obstacles between your self-hero or anti-hero and their goal. And rule number 3, set them loose. Just let go. Don't map your fucking story to the Odyssey. And don't try to base your writing on a biblical chapter. Just be honest, be organic, and let the drama emerge from this valid and validated foundation of character, honest character, clearly defined goal, and realistic, organic obstacles on that hero's quest to get what they want. That's it. And as the character moves through the story, pull from your lived experiences and the people you knew, and don't hesitate to extrapolate from your own biographical situation. And here's the other thing that I learned. And here, in this sense, all the decades of my struggle as an artist didn't go to waste, because I also learned how to take my experiences, which in the past I would dismiss as failures, and embrace failure as a vehicle of great literature. When have you seen a movie or a play where everyone gets along and they're happy? It's like David Byrne sang in the Talking Heads song, Heaven. Heaven is a place where nothing ever happens and they always play my favorite song. That's not literature. Dante's Inferno is the best of the trilogy. Purgatorio is pretty good because it's like the singularity between heaven and hell. But in the circles of hell, that's where the great literature happens. And Paradiso is nice, it's pretty, but don't tell me that that's the best of the 3. And think of your favorite movies and your favorite books. They're tragic, the characters are shitty people, and oftentimes the ending is a disaster. It's not like everybody gets what they want. It's quite the opposite. What kind of movie would Casablanca have been if the two reconcile or they leave together? Blah. The entire movie would have been ruined had they gotten married in Paris. Gag. See what I'm saying? So, yes, I fucked up. I fucked up as a writer and a creative person. I mean, get out of here. I'm cracking 60 years old and I'm figuring this out. I'm cracking 60 years old and I finally wrote the book of my dreams. But here's the thing. I did it. I did it. And what's even more significant is the feeling that I have openly and honestly saying that I fucking did it. I know I did it. The book that I published this June is not the book that I visualized in specifics when I was 22 and I read Notes from Underground. I didn't visualize the book that I can hold in my hand now. But in the feeling of it, this feeling that I have created a new style that is unique to me. I have created my own unique voice. And I believe this to be true. Not only that, but I wanted the writing to be electrifying and fresh. Like Eddie Van Halen's Eruption guitar solo. When people listen to that, you are, what the actual fuck is going on here? I believe that my novel, you turn to any random page and you have that feeling. That doesn't mean you're going to have the feeling, but here's my point of this entire rant. I have that feeling. And I say it with celebration and justification and without gloating. Even though I sound like I'm gloating, I earned this. Like Jimi Hendrix, are you experienced? And then he kind of laughs. Yeah, I am. And then the guitars go in reverse. The guitars go in reverse, I think, whether he was consciously or unconsciously trying to communicate. The guitars are going in reverse because Jimi Hendrix was experienced by want of all those countless hours and hours he spent noodling around with the electric guitar. And you hear his licks backwards because he's paying homage to the 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 hours that he played that guitar. And by going backwards, he's going forward. It gives him the foundation to stand there with his upside down right-handed Stratocaster and blow the doors off everybody, set the fucking thing on fire, and turn the music world upside down at the age of 25, 26. Why? Because he's experienced. I'm experienced, God damn it. And my book has its own unique style. And I think so. I think so for all the reasons that I've been ranting about. I think so not only because I failed for decades and was distracted with other life pursuits for decades, even though I was working in business and continue to, I was still writing. I've written hundreds of business blogs and business writing and email and blah, 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 and being on social media for years, blah, 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 chronicling my life, whether it's sitting on the toilet as an anti-post to all the posts of people with their boats and food and vacations. I got sick of that shit even in 2007. What are you guys doing? You're a bunch of arrogant assholes. I'm going to post from the toilet as a statement that this Vanity Fair is repulsive. But I indulged even my own vanity using the medium. So I have been writing continuously my whole life. But when I say I fucked up, is my true dream as a human, my purpose in life was to write a novel that had its own unique Mookie Spitz style, nothing like it before, that came from my lived experience, that was electrifying with every turn of the page, and that I could hold in my hand and say all of these things to the point where I have the confidence to give it to anybody on the planet. The Pope, the ghost of Carl Sagan, my dead grandma, a university professor, a random guy or gal on the street. That's how confident I am in my sense of purpose being accomplished. Now, why am I going on about that? Gertrude Stein in 1935, in her Lectures on America, wrote that she writes for herself and strangers, frankly, are an afterthought. She writes for herself. So what I have been saying is basically regurgitating the sentiment behind Gertrude's comment, which is only a moron, an imbecile, a fool, a crazy person would with zero profitability, we're talking incomprehensibly negative ROI here, dedicate thousands of hours of concerted effort with no compensation, with no benefit outside the personal satisfaction, and in most cases here, struggle of trying to figure it out, just like Heisenberg. You got to be nuts, or you got to be like Gertrude. I write for myself and strangers as an afterthought. And I did that, and my novel, as far as I'm concerned, is all that I ever wanted to do since I figured out I wanted to do something. There's a corollary to this, and that, since June, is the reaction that my book has gotten from the unmentioned part of Gertrude's comment. Now, I wrote for myself, check. And strangers as an afterthought, check. That explains why I have frankly done a shit job promoting this book, because I wrote the book of my dreams. That's a certain skill set and obsession. Very different from the obsession that people who are wired differently have to be successful. It's just about being successful. It's just about being rich. I want my bank account padded. I want people to love me. Remember, that's a built-in instinct. Now, I have it too, and Gertrude has it too, but it's a matter of prioritization. We are all people, and all people are us. We breathe the same air. We eat the same food. However, there's endless variability. And where that variability centers is usually in prioritization of our capabilities, energy, and committed resources. That's how we're different from each other. Now, there could be a biochemical foundation, nature versus nurture, but what I'm saying here is I am like Gertrude Stein. I write for myself, and frankly, as an afterthought for strangers. That is how I'm wired. I'm not making excuses for doing a shit job over the last 2-3 months marketing my great American novel. But what I'm saying is that for me, the mission to be accomplished was writing the fucking thing. And now I can't wait to write its sequel. And now that I figured this out, it's hell's bells. I just don't have enough time in the day to keep doing what I'm doing because I finally, like Heisenberg, figured it out. But what this rant ostensibly is about is what's missing in Gertrude Stein's comment. I write for myself and strangers. Where's the friends and family? Well, here's the thing. If you're an unknown writer, you're known as a marketing guy, a PR guy. You're on LinkedIn. You don't even get much engagement on LinkedIn anymore because the last 2, 3, 4 years you've been busy creative writing. You are a different kind of person than what friends and family and colleagues know you to be. That's number one. And number two, this begs the question of Gertrude's comment and the wisdom behind it. Writing for friends and family sucks. And you really need your head examined if you're going to expect any of your friends or family, and for that matter, colleagues in this former or concurrent incarnation of yourself, to understand what the hell you're doing, appreciate what you're doing, and provide support for what you're doing. And it's unfair to them for you to naively assume that they're going to step up to meet that challenge. They do not give a shit. And if they care about you doing this, then the opposite often happens. If they have vested interest, if they themselves actually practice your craft, then if what you're saying is true, you have written the book of your dreams and you have literally slaved away for decades and you've written millions of words and you have copied every writer that you've loved to the point where you've given up and written 10,000 pages of just associative, free-flowing writing to the point where you finally bust out and are able to do it. That commitment is implicit behind the work itself. And chances are they didn't do that. And chances are they don't have the confidence that you have created for yourself. And chances are they're jelly, they're FOMO. And then they'll take an opportunity to nitpick at your work because they gotta find a flaw. They might think that you have you have under-edited the work, that you have indulged yourself, that you have written something that can't possibly be popular because it's so idiosyncratic, that you're so self-absorbed that you've lost connection to any kind of real audience. The list would go on and on how a friend, a family member, or colleague who is actually a writer or has interests in writing, or for that matter, and this is what really amazes me, appears in the goddamn book. So what I'm getting at here is friends and family and even colleagues. Writing is difficult. My novel is 114,000 words long. That's about 8 to 10 hours of concerted effort just to get through the fucking thing. Who has that time? When do you place a demand on another person, friend or foe, for committing 8 to 10 hours of time to look at something that you've done? It's unprecedented. Nobody makes that demand. That's number one. Number two, it's writing. You need to analyze it, interpret it. Even if you like reading and writing, or just like reading, it's work, it's effort. They need to concentrate on your stuff. And three, it's a specialty. Let's say a friend or family or colleague is really, really good at woodworking, or for that matter, is awesome at putting together business contracts, or for that matter, puts together a campaign for a brand. Does this person go around to friends and family and even other colleagues, look at this case study, check it out, what do you think? Kiss my ass, at least applaud from the sidelines? That never happens. Why? Because it's gauche, it's audacious, it's narcissistic. And people react badly to that shit, which is, what do you want, a fucking cookie for your campaign? You want to give you a lottery ticket for your new design studio in your basement? It's always awkward and tacky when people gloat about something they've done or something they've acquired. We've all kind of like cringed when a friend or family member, let alone a colleague, buys a new car and gives you a ride, let alone, here's my new yacht. You want to come for a Sunday spin? We could have mimosas on the deck. You know what? Fuck you. Fuck you and your boat. Fuck you and your mimosas. You know, you're an arrogant prick. You're just showing off. That's a natural human reaction to this stuff. You think, as a writer, as a creative person, that you have put your heart and soul and your life's work into this 8 to 10 hour experience for people. And then there's this implicit expectation that they would spend the time and energy to consume the goddamn thing, let alone understand what the fuck you're talking about in your specialty. And then what? I get it. That's why Gertrude's comment is so great. I write for myself and strangers. I write for myself, and that for me took decades for me to like it. And then I'm, as an offhand kind of secondary thing, maybe I write for strangers. It would be nice if someone bought the book just so I could dedicate myself more to writing, maybe even pay off the mountain of debt that I've accrued to get to this point to be this kind of writer. That would all be nice. But this idea that friends and colleagues and family owe me anything, or let alone respond to it in a meaningful way, is a contrite, naive, kind of pathetic feeling on my part. So I am being transparent in my deficiency. Now, that said, I am somewhat amazed by the reaction of a few particular friends, maybe colleagues, maybe family. My sister Ava, for example, and I could say her by name because the book is dedicated to her. She's a writer, and she has read the book. She hasn't given me that much feedback on the book per se because it's not in her wheelhouse. She's written biographical fiction and travel fiction. She's written, I think, a dozen books. There's a writing gene in the family. You could call it a scourge, or you could call it a spark. But she's a writer too. And I've read a few of her books, and I commented, and we argued about them. And she has read mine. I don't think she really gets it. Science fiction is not her genre. And I get that. But she shared the book. She's talked about it. And she's, most importantly, encouraged me emotionally to just keep doing what I'm doing. And I feel blessed to have her as, frankly, as I say in the dedication, my biggest fan. She was the one angry at me, literally angry at me for putting my creative writing to the side. Even when I spawned a family by accident, she was like, keep that going. You are a writer. My sister, since I was a little kid telling stories and drawing with crayons, said, I'm a writer, I'm a creator, I'm a storyteller. And sometimes I believed her and sometimes I didn't. And again, if she was angry at me at any point in my life over these decades, that was when I either abandoned my creative writing or put it on the burner. She always felt that it should be front and center, and that's my thing. And she was right. So I appreciate her. And I'm also sensitive to the fact, too, that honestly, the book is 420 pages long or so. And frankly, I would be smoking 420 if I expect folks to pick it up and just understand it the way I do. But my sister, who loves me, who's been reading me forever, frankly, I think it's above the head and between the legs, as I say. Parts of it are too crude and parts of it are too sophisto, and it's not her cup of tea. However, she has been unbelievably supportive, and I love her for it. But she's my sister. She's close to me. There have been other folks who've been amazing, but in different ways. And I'm not calling them out to chastise them or judge them, but I'm merely using this to reiterate the wisdom and eternal goodness of Gertrude's comment for all the reasons that I've said, which is if people understand you and know what went into it and actually acknowledge the brilliance of your accomplishment, the natural human reaction is silence or smothering and a dismissal, because a bright light casts a long shadow. For example, I've got one colleague, not to nitpick. Whole parts of my novel focus on branding. The book is called Johnny Fazuli and the Transfinite Reality Engine. There's at least 15 pages of content dedicated to how my hero thinks of the fucking name of the device. And I go through a branding exercise in a very humorous and provocative way. I comment on the process that companies use to brand products and services. I go for another 15 pages or so about the idea of inventing a product or service from scratch and some of the absurdities that have gone into this and some of the silliness and zaniness of naming conventions. So I've got a colleague who's an expert in branding. And I appreciate the fact that he got the book and he apparently read the book. But when it degenerates into total silence, then I'm kind of like, really? And I bring this up because, again, I am blaming myself for having the naivete to assume that people, even those close to you, even though those people that you have broken bread with, that you've shared intimate details of your life with, won't be there for you because people don't like it when other people succeed. And by this, I mean people succeed in their immediate circle. There's an ancillary aspect to this, which I also find fascinating. And that's the notion of the fan. Like you have your favorite bands, your favorite writers. There always has to be a distance to the people that we extol. People love making jokes that Keith Richards is going to live forever. And you see the memes all the time that, here's Keith Richards teaching Moses how to play guitar. That's how old Keith Richards is. Ha 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 ha. We celebrate and worship people with the one prerequisite that they're not, never have been, and never will be in our immediate social circle. They have to be from a different tribe, from a different place. Why? Because there's zero probability of this kind of personal overlap. In 3 of the 4 books of the New Testament, there's the same sentiment expressed, which is essentially that a prophet cannot be holy, considered holy in their own town. And this is how Jesus felt in Bethlehem. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm Jesus H. Christ. I'm saying that if you do something, anything that's astonishing, that's amazing, that's beyond the norm, it makes people uncomfortable because you did it and they didn't. So Jesus was always a schmuck carpenter, the guy who pissed and jerked off behind the barn. We saw him for being human, and we're not going to buy into this notion that this guy is the Son of God. Get out of here. When you're a friend or a colleague, or for that matter, a family member, and you try something different and you go above and beyond, people don't want to hear about it. And it gets even worse, not better, if what you're doing crosses over into the expertise or interest of that person whom you know personally, because it exposes them to 2 things. Your own haughty arrogance for being such a show-off, and their own sense of disappointment that they didn't do what you did. And as an adjunct to that, this is compounded by these people seeing mirror reflections of themselves in the damn book. I have another friend whose personality, loosely, aspects of our interpersonal relationship are reflected in the text. And this person had a similar reaction. There wasn't just one, by the way, there were several, but I'm just thinking of one person in particular where it's obvious that we have aspects of our relationship in the book. Now, this person I'm thinking of didn't finish the book and had nothing to say about it. This is a primary character in the book, in the series. Nothing. Why? Again, it's the same thing. At least I didn't get a barrage of vitriol. How dare you share aspects of our relationship? But I got Z fucking row enthusiasm, or not a single comment as to the accuracy or not of our dynamic. And to me, most interestingly, there was zero attempt at any kind of catharsis or understanding of our relationship through my complex projection of it in this work of literature. Nothing, zero. Now, another friend who's in there reacted quite differently. It's very funny. She zipped right to what appeared to be sections dedicated to our relationship and shared quite a few comments. So I'm not trying to convey the ubiquity of this derision or obfuscation or apathy. But again, the point of this rant is as really an homage to Gertrude. That one statement is so resonant. And I make the mistake of leaning too heavily on a very select target audience out of sheer pragmatism. And this goes back again to my need for at least some, just a little bit of positive social reinforcement. I'll even take negative reinforcement. Tell me the book needs more editing. Tell me that I overindulged in this area. Tell me that this part doesn't make sense or this does. I'm game, but I'm getting nothing. And I deserve to get nothing because it's unfair of me and naive of me to put this kind of burden on friends, family, colleagues to spend the time to indulge my own fancy. So it's on me, folks. And I needed to have this catharsis over the last hour and a half of ranting. And I think if this rant has any meaning, it's to convey the universality and, in a sense, ubiquity of all these mistakes. And also to highlight the silver lining of this stuff. The silver lining of the creative book, of writing a book, of any creative project, which is in these human flaws, namely mine, is the stuff of art. Disappointment, loneliness, isolation, an incapacity or unwillingness to connect to our fellow humans, the frustration of being human as fuel, the shit that grows the flower of great art and great writing. And to put a capper on it, when I was younger, I found this deafening silence excruciating, asphyxiating, and often paralyzing. And now, in my old age, and with the momentum of all that I've learned, and frankly, at this point, accomplished creatively, it's all fuel for the next phase of whatever the hell it is I'll be able, willing, and excited, and hopefully can do. Will I make these mistakes in the future? I sure hope so. And will any of my family or friends or colleagues come around? Absolutely not. And I'd be an incorrigible imbecile to expect anything different. But here's the ultimate paradox of this. I finally cracked the code by making my protagonist exactly that kind of narcissistic, incorrigible imbecile. I am Johnny Fazuli. Remember Iron Man, that great movie with the Charlie Chaplin actor? I don't know why I've blacked out. I've gone on continuously for an hour and 25 minutes, and I've forgotten the actor's name. Robert Downey Jr. This is a sign from the universe that I need to shut the fuck up at this point. Robert Downey Jr. in Iron Man. That was a great movie. You might not like superhero movies or action movies. The first Iron Man movie is a classic because he starts a genius asshole and he ends a genius asshole, but he's been likable throughout, and he gains the semblance of a moral compass by the end of the film, and he unabashedly cuts what could have been another full-length fucking movie. He sits there, stares at everyone, rips up the script, and says, "I am Iron Man." Boom. And then, this is again a great director, instead of opening with the Black Sabbath riff, which is iconic, instead of opening, a shitty director, a shitty storyteller would have opened with that theme song. They end with it. So allow me to end this rant about writing, the loneliness, the isolation, the alienation of the writer's life with that statement. I am the protagonist who busted me through, who helped me crack the code. And you know what? I'm not only okay with it, but I celebrate it. And I can't wait to finish the second, third, fourth, and fifth book of the adventures of Johnny Fazuli and the Transfinite Reality Engine. And stay tuned for the sequel, which I'm already working on, which I've already written 50%, but it's actually only 25%, because as I start writing, it just keeps getting more and more elaborate, which is exactly what Johnny Fazuli would do and say. Thank you for listening. If by chance you're listening and I know you and I've offended you, that's okay. You'll forgive me, right? Everyone forgives Johnny Fazuli. And if you're just coming into this and you can relate to it, either as a writer, as a reader, suffice to say that anytime anyone does anything amazing, it elicits this kind of response. So hopefully there's a catharsis for you too in all the good works that you do. And from Johnny to you, just keep doing it. Because what's the point of doing a deal if you can't have any fun? Because then you'll die. And people all say, that guy didn't have any fun. Thanks for listening to the No Hair, All Heart podcast, which, by the way, I have usurped this podcast with readings from the book. So if you're hearing this and are curious about this novel that I've been gloating about, I've read literally half of it on this channel. I stopped after finishing episode 3 out of 6, hoping that I would record the audio version, but I've since gotten another microphone and have been doing another million things, but I hope to get the audio version that I'll record out ASAP. Stay tuned. Thank you for listening. Like, comment, share.